What's a disturbing fact you wish you could unlearn? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. When I had open heart surgery nearly 20 years ago at age 28, the doctors places pacer wires in my heart just in case they needed to stimulate my heart electrically after the surgery. My words, not theirs. So I wake up and find 2 yellow copper electrical wires sticking out of torso. Later that day, the nurse came to remove them. This is done by simply tugging until they come free from small hooks or barbs on the end in the heart wall. The nurse warned me in advance that it'd feel my heart physically pull down in my body. She was not kidding. It was unpleasant to say the least. But now, years later, I literally can't forget what it feels like to have someone tug on my heartstrings. Answer. This happened with my boyfriend. He had a heart condition as a kid and had surgery as a teenager. Still had the wires coming out of his chest after surgery and asked the doctor about them, who was all, "Oh yeah, let's get these," and then grabbed and pulled them out. He said it was a really weird feeling. A year later, a medication to manage his heart condition was made available, which would have made the surgery unnecessary. Whoomp, whoomp. Story 2. There's a condition called Cotard's delusion, where a person genuinely believes they're dead, like fully dead, but their body just hasn't noticed yet. Some even stop eating or ask to be buried. The mind is terrifying when it breaks. Answer. I had a sort of similar but much less severe feeling some years ago, early 30s, and it persisted for a couple months. I wouldn't say I felt fully dead, but I felt like the difference between me as an organism alive and me as an organism not alive was unnoticeable or meaningless. Emotionally, it did feel like I was already dead, or like I was just a body without a mind. I remember a lot of sitting around on the floor looking at nothing and going through days on autopilot. Probably some psychology-oriented folks will chime in to say this is just depression, or disassociation, or ego passing or something. I have no idea. In any case, it passed and my internal life got back to normal. Story 3. The whistle of an artillery or mortar shell falling towards you is actually the deviation from its trajectory and where you're currently standing. The closer you are to where it'll land, the less you hear. If it's a direct hit, you won't hear anything at all. Story 4. Dominant female meerkats will eliminate the pups of subordinate female meerkats, then force the subordinate females to feed her babies as tribute or rent to be allowed to remain in the group. That shoot is intense AF. Story 5. Once I read that as a research project, someone put a fake turtle in the road to observe driver behavior, and something like 8 of people deliberately went out of their way to hit the turtle. Edit, someone pointed out it's 6, not 8. My bad. Answer, one day as a kid, we were driving home from the beach. My mom, siblings, my mom's best friend who was driving, and her kids. She had to suddenly stop on the freeway because a pillowcase with big lumps was in the middle of the lane. The far right lane she was able to pull over into the median. Turns out there were 2 tortoises in the pillowcase. One was smashed and dead. We rescued the other. Friend kept it for years in the large property. That's when I learned about illegal animal trade and stealing animals from the wild. The vet said it was definitely a wild tortoise from somewhere. But since they couldn't find where she came from, they couldn't release her. She lived a good life as wild as possible with good food and shelter and acres to wander in. I named her Lucky that day, and it stuck. Edit, the friend literally ran into the freeway to rescue the still live tortoise. She was not in a shelter or was adopted in any way. Friend kept the tortoise and brought her to a vet, where she was told the info that she was most likely wild and stolen from the desert. This was over 20 years ago in Southern California, and I don't remember what kind of tortoise she was. Just that she was from the desert. Story 6. Lots of creatures eat their newborn if there isn't enough resources to go around. At age 12, I learned this by discovering the small, half-severed pink bodies of hamster pups while changing their mom's cage litter. Apparently, she wasn't just a cuddly, soft, huggable ball of fur. Answer. I once had surprise hedgehog babies when I bought a hedgehog that I was not aware was pregnant. One day I check on her to find 8 little hoglets. A quick Googling told me to cover the cage and not bother her outside of making sure she had food and water for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks passed, there were 4 hoglets. I didn't ask any questions but viewed Sweet Sydney in a different light from then on. Story 7. Centipedes let their young feed on their bodies and obviously dies while the babies just have a feast on their mother's corpse. Answer. Centipedes are cannibals. I once eliminated one, picked it up with a tissue, balled it up, and tossed it in the trash. Came home to find another centipede trying to get inside the balled-up tissue. They gross me out more than any other bug. My brother always says, you should welcome centipedes because they eat all the other bugs. I don't really mind any other bug half as much as a centipede, not even spiders, so long as they're not of the Australian variety. Story 8. That other post about the serial killer eliminate 36 women then being entombed alive. All around terrible. Answer. Kind of reminds me of the sentence Yavdik Balin got. For those who don't want to read the article, he was a serial killer in Pakistan who was sentenced to passing after admitting to eliminate 100 young boys, ages 6 to 16. He was given 100 passing sentences, but the judge decided he was to die by strangling him with the same chain he's used for his victims, his body to be cut into 100 pieces and then dissolved in acid. Unsurprisingly, he offed himself in prison. Story 9. How much of modern medicine relies on a hunch or trial and error? Before I worked in a hospital, I used to think doctors knew everything and that curing illness was straightforward. That will apply to some diseases, but there are many, many more which are vague and treatment isn't really well established or doesn't always respond as you might expect. Makes you afraid to get sick after a while. Answer. This is the thing with science. It is constantly being tested to be proven accurate. It isn't always found to be accurate. In the field of psychology, they are starting to find that many of the studies conducted in the 1900s, all the way up to 1999, are not producing the same findings. They believe this is partly due to the increased usage of technology, our change in interactions due to our change in lifestyle, but also they theorize that the human species goes through cycles that result in changes in our psychological outlooks. Story 10. Basically, every scene in movies where someone dies in lava is wrong. Your body is 80 water, and molten magma or lava is just rock that's so hot that it's in a liquid state. Rock is a lot denser than water, even in a liquid state, so you wouldn't sink into it. Your body would float on the surface of the lava, burning to a crisp while you scream in agony. Actually, it might be even worse, given that when the water in every one of your cells is suddenly exposed to extreme temperatures all at once, it instantly boils. If that exposure is fast enough, it boils explosively. And since your body is in a perfect sphere, being exposed to the 800°C lava all at the same time, what might actually happen could be parts of your body explosively boiling and popping, as little steam explosions rupture your burned skin as you burn alive, floating on the superheated rock smoothie. Story 11. The mouth and anus share similar nerve endings, which is why eating something spicy can cause a burning sensation, both when it goes in and when it comes out. Answer. That is actually pretty interesting because one of the first dividing points between animal types are protostomes and deuterostomes. During the very earliest embryonic stages of development, an embryo forms an opening. For protostomes, that is their mouth first. For deuterostomes, that is their butthole. All vertebrates are deuterostomes. So at one point in every person's development, we were all just assholes. Story 12. It was believed for a long time that babies do not feel pain, and no anesthesia is required when a surgery is performed. This only started to change in the late 1980s after mom of an infant who underwent open heart surgery without anesthesia started a campaign to raise awareness. Whenever I think of it and imagine those poor babies who had to go through an excruciating pain with muscle relaxant that prevented them from moving and fighting back on top of that, I'm in tears. I don't understand how medical professionals could have subjected them to such horror. Answer, much the same as with women. It was in the 90s that medical science accepted that the cervix has nerves, despite what women had been saying for years. But we're still not offered pain relief from colposcopies and smear tests, despite us feeling every bit. It was also only in the 90s that women were added to tests for pain relief. Until then, they were only tested on men. Because of the old belief that women don't feel pain, a theory based on experiments mostly done on enslaved women, giving rise to the theory that black women felt no pain at all. Black enslaved women would have hysterectomies, etc., with zero pain relief. Oh, and that lack of pain relief for smear tests, etc. It also applies to the insertion and removal of IUDs. If you're unsure about them, look them up. But if you're male, women already know. Prepare for ball cringe. Story 13. Untreated dental infections can lead to abscesses on the brain that result in a brain injury. A 40-year-old guy went from bad teeth to paraplegia and brain injury from living a normal life into a group home on government benefits. Answer: this could have been my reality very early on. My childhood dentist was obsessed with saving child teeth for some reason, and my parents didn't know any better. I chipped a tooth as a kid, so the dentist put a metal crown on it to save it. Problem was this made the tooth stick around way longer than it should have, so it impacted the growth of my adult molar under it. Eventually the cap came off because the baby tooth under it literally cracked in half from the adult tooth coming up. All of this caused a big abscess I had no idea about until the cap came off, and I was in massive pain. After x-rays and I think an MRI, I was told that I had a life-threatening abscess in my jaw that I would need operated on. I remember having them explain to me that there was a very, very, very real chance that they would fudge up the nerves in my jaw because of how close the abscess was, but there wasn't really any other option. Thankfully, everything turned out all right, but that was my first official surgery. Story 14. All the foods that make me feel good or eliminate my body. WTF kind of nonsense truth is that? I know why, but I disagree. Story 15. I noticed some spots on my puppy's eyeballs 2 weeks ago. Took her to a dog ophthalmologist. Turns out they are dermoids, which are stray skin cells that are growing where skin shouldn't. That's not worst part. There's a hair growing out of one of the cells. My puppy's eyeball is growing hair. Story 16. Coffin births. When someone who is pregnant dies, as gases build up in the body from decay, it can push a baby out. I think the first records of this happened in Pompeii. Story 17. That kid, Cameron Robbins, who jumped over a ship into shark-infested waters and was literally devoured in seconds, makes my head feel fuzzy when I think of that poor kid. There was also someone recently who was hiking and fell down a steep slope towards a volcano and couldn't get up or move at all without slipping further in. She was stuck there for days, slowly dying from exposure and the toxic fumes. And oh God, that one really messed with me too. Some people are just dealt a shoot hand. Answer. Old guy from the Navy had a story. New kid was playing football on the USS Nimitz deck and went too long for a pass and went over. When this happens, they send out a fast little boat to try and get them. All they found was his cap, which had blood on it. Sharks follow these ships around because they leave so much edible material in their wake in the form of food waste. Story 18. That there are some states where medical students are permitted to do pelvic exams on women when they're under anesthesia without asking permission beforehand. Answer. This happened to a lady in Arizona that had a pelvic exam done without her knowledge or consent during a procedure. After she woke up, the member of staff attending to her informed her that her period had started. Edit, found the story. Stupid paywall, so we'll paste below. Headline, she didn't want a pelvic exam, but she received one anyway. Medical schools and students performing pelvic exams by Emma Goldberg. Published Afyarshaku 17-2020. Update Faye. 19. 2020 Janine, a nurse in Arizona, checked into the hospital for stomach surgery in 2017. Before the procedure, she told her physician that she did not want medical students to be directly involved. But after the operation, Janine said as the anesthesia wore off, a resident came by to inform her that she had gotten her period. The resident had noticed while conducting a pelvic exam. What pelvic exam? Janine, 33, asked. Distressed, she tried to piece together what had happened while she was unconscious. Why had her intimacy organs been inspected during an abdominal operation? By someone other than her surgeon? Later, she said, her physician explained that the operating team had seen she was due for a pap smear. Janine burst into tears. I started having panic attacks trying to figure out what had happened, she recalled in an interview. I have a history of intimacy abuse, and it brought up bad memories. She felt especially unnerved as a medical professional. Patients put such trust in the medical profession, especially on sensitive topics, such as going under anesthesia. Janine asked that she be identified only by her middle name. The hospital declined to comment on its policies regarding informed consent for pelvic exams. Pelvic exams necessitate physical inspection of the most sensitive areas of a woman's body. The exams are typically conducted while the patient is awake and consenting at a gynecologist visit to screen for certain cancers, infections, and other reproductive health issues. But across many U.S. states and medical institutions, physicians are not required to obtain explicit consent for the procedure. Sometimes the exams are conducted by doctors or doctors in training, while women are under anesthesia for gynecological and other operations. Story 19. We got a dog that had heartworms. They got treated and are doing perfectly fine now. The thing is, it prompted me to look into them. They're spread by mosquitoes and can live in most large mammals. So what stops humans from getting them? Nothing. The answer is nothing. They just aren't harmful to humans because they can't breed properly in us. You and I might have a few right now, and that goes for most parasitic worms BTW. Story 20. When the Soviet Union launched the street dog Laika into space before launching a man, they had no intention of bringing the pup home alive. Though they provided for food and water, they didn't plan for her to come back to Earth. She lived a few hours and likely died from heat-related stress. The capsule orbited for a few weeks until our atmosphere and gravity dragged it back in, burning up during re-entry. This has always been a sad story to me since the day I learned it long ago. Story 21. There are more slaves in the world today than at any other time in human history. According to organizations like the International Labor Organization and Walk Free Foundation, an estimated 50 million people are living in modern slavery, including forced labor, human trafficking, debt bondage, and forced marriage. It's unsettling because it highlights how widespread and invisible these systems can be, even in supposedly advanced societies. Once you know, you start seeing the signs in supply chains, industries, and global economics. Story 22. The number of women who have experienced traumatic brain injury, TBI, due to domestic violence is estimated to be 11 to 12 times greater than the number of TBIs experienced by all military personnel and athletes combined. Answer. What's wild is that both military personnel and pro-athlete injuries are studied, reported, and documented. TBIs from intimate personal violence, eclipsing those numbers is staggering considering it's often unreported, so we're only getting a small sample of its scope. A type of egregious harm is in greater occurrence in regular life for women than in fields dedicated to feats of strength and violence. Note, anybody can be affected by IPVV, intimate partner violence. I just specified women to stay true to the comment, and it's what I've researched. Story 23, Unit 731, Japanese experimentation on the human body in the 1930s and 40s. Never ever read up about it. I feel sorry for the poor authors on Wikipedia who had to type up and edit that article. Story 24. Male dogs have a bone in their male body part called the EOS male body part. Like other bones, it can break. Raccoons also have an OS male body part. Story 25. I used to remind coworkers of this after particularly nasty jobs when I worked as a paramedic. When you smell something, that means microscopic particles of what you're smelling have floated into your nose and sinuses and bonded with a scent receptor. It delivers its message and then your body breaks down the molecules and either they get removed from your body by your snot or they get broken down and become you. Always good to reflect on that when you're dealing with a lot of shoot or decomposition. God, I was such a male body part LOL. Story 26. Dead people will moan or groan well after they've died. The gases produced from decomposition have to escape the body somehow. So it's either that or the other end. Story 27. Read somewhere that almost every survivor who jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge instantly regretted it as soon as they left the railing. Answer. It is more than that. About 85 of people who fail tragic and regret attempting. About 40 of people who fail a tragic end attempt try again. Coming near passing basically washes the brain in a hormone mix that negates hormones linked to depression, boosts mood, causes optimism, and releases dopamine for several days. The problem is that the underlying issues are not resolved. Eventually, the hormone mix fades and people return to pre-attempt conditions, which can lead to a second attempt. Story 28. For pretty much any chemical you can buy, the manufacturer has to be able to provide you an SDS, a safety data sheet, which tells you all about the dangers of it and how to deal with it in emergency situations. Most of these sheets contain the consumed LD50, lethal dose for 50 for rats, meaning that's the quantity where if you feed it to 100 rats, 50 of them die. Many will also contain the topical LD50 for rabbits, meaning the quantity where if you coated 100 rabbits with the chemical, 50 of them would die. When I go to a store and look at the aisle with cleaning chemicals, I start thinking about all those animals force-fed or coated with chemicals and dying in misery. Story 29. When I heard there are brothels with shaved orange utans as prostitutes, I lost all faith in humanity. Story 30. The Junko Furuta story. When I read about it back in college, I cannot sleep properly because why are there people like those? Story 31. That corpses can get goosebumps during rigor mortis, the body's muscles contract in such a way that it mimics being cold or afraid. It's unsettling how, even in passing, the body can still imitate life. Story 32. Most of the Challenger crew were conscious for the entire 2-minute fall back to Earth. They even put on their emergency oxygen masks. Story 33. Your body doesn't know that you have eyes, and if you ever get an eye infection, your body could begin to attack your eyes, leaving you blind as it goes to attack the infection. Story 34. That spiders can hide in your shoes. Learned it when I was like 5 and check every pair of shoes to this day. Shudder. Story 35. That our universe could actually be made with false vacuum. The vacuum between elemental particles isn't completely void, but has some minimal energy. However, it's possible to speculate that this minimal is only a local minimal and that something even more void could exist. If that's the case, a change in phase could create a bubble of true void somewhere in the universe. That would be expending, erasing everything. If such a bubble exists nearby, we would have no way of knowing as it expends at light speed. Basically, everything can disappear at once, in a flash and without any warning. Story 36. Everybody is winging it. The only thing holding us together are perceived notions of what's normal and what isn't. Story 37. Korean comfort women. It's literally nightmare fuel. I had to read some Korean war refugee book where a young child, her mom and her sister, presenting as male, survived WW2. There are multiple almost caught moments. I became an adult, and now looking back, I realized they weren't afraid of being eliminated. They were terrified of being alive under the Japanese Army's care. Story 38. No one understands how inhalant anesthesia actually works. We just use it. That's why it's called practicing medicine shiver. Story 39. People can become so constipated that they vomit feces. Doctors then have to insert tubes down the nose to suck the poop out of the nose in order to empty the stomach. Story 40. Chinese nationals have come to Zambia and Africa, bringing food clothing resources they seek out needy local people who are hungry, malnourished, or homeless, and offer them food clothing and shelter if they will work in Chinese-owned local brothels and intimacy businesses. Story 41. Well, Mom, since I am in the medical field, I guess I will tell you one of my biggest surprises. There is such a thing as a fecal transplant, and it's exactly what you think it is. It's abbreviated FMT for fecal microbiota transplantation. So someone who is missing their good gut bacteria get an FMT to help restore their healthy gut bacteria. A healthy person donates their shoot, and then it is given one of 4 different ways: through a colonoscopy, through an enema, through an upper endoscopy. That's right, starting in the mouth and going down, and finally in pill form. So yeah, your doctor can tell you to eat shoot and be perfectly serious. Story 42. There's an intimacy term called gift giver, which is someone, usually a gay man, that knowingly infect their intimacy partners with HIV. People that go after them are called bug chasers. Story 43. Dolphins. Dolphins and their bullshit. Dolphins and their prehensile male body part. Ion trust those motherfuckers. Answer, and orcas. I read the Portuguese government's FAQ on orcas attacking boats. The first question was, are they confusing boats for natural prey or predators? And the official answer was essentially, no, they're not confused. They understand boats. They understand what the rudder does on boats. They're just the kind of assholes who think it's hilarious to smash your rudder and watch you go in circles and leak. Story 44. When Lenin died in 1924, the USSR placed his body on display, and his body has been on display ever since. That's gross. Story 45. The black line on a shrimp's back is their intestinal tract, so if you eat shrimp that aren't divine, you're eating their poop. You're welcome. Story 46. There could be someone in your social circle, note, I didn't say friend group, that dislike you enough to eliminate you, and you probably never see it coming. Most takedown victims knew their killer, and they obviously didn't see it coming. What makes you different? Edit. Y'all are tripping if you think you're smarter or more observant than them. It's adorable, really. Edit 2. Yes, there are some cases where they saw it coming, but look at them. Dead anyway. Doesn't change my point. Answer. The scary part is why they suspect the killer, but the police won't act, etc. Hell, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that police are under no obligation to serve and protect. When a woman who had a restraining order against her ex called the cops that he was going to eliminate her, that he was violating his restraining order, etc., they did nothing. He eliminate her. How shoot is it to know this person wants to eliminate you and no one will help? Story 47. The father of modern gynecology, J. Marion Sims, did the majority of his surgical experiments on black slave women with no anesthesia. Due to the belief that black people couldn't feel pain, he performed the surgeries and tests without consent, sometimes over and over again on the same woman, RX, fistula surgery. In addition to Anarcha, Betsy and Lucy, Sims writes, I got 3 or 4 more to experiment on, and there was never a time that I could not, at any day, have had a subject for operation. But my operations all failed. This went on, not for 1 year, but for 2 and 3, and even 4 years. Answer. Due to the belief that black people couldn't feel pain, I'm skeptical that they actually believe this, but rather made this claim to justify what they knew were atrocities. Same with babies. No functioning human over the age of 3 could possibly not understand that other humans feel pain, let alone one, presumably trained in medical science, especially considering that during slavery, whips were used to keep them in line. That's a clear indication that they knew pain aversion would be an effective motivator. More likely that they simply didn't view slaves as truly human and thus not worthy of being treated as one. Story 48. The real sick shoot in human trafficking and human cruelty. It just breaks your heart how evil and cruel people can be to other humans. Sometimes you just want to exterminatus the planet of humans when you learn the level of cruelty we are capable. It makes you lose trust in humanity. Story 49. Anosognosia is a condition where the brain literally cannot understand that something is wrong. Happens to like 40 in psychosis, stroke victims, and more. This is why you can't reason someone through a delusion. They psychologically cannot understand that they are delusional. Leap is a therapy tactic where you try to reason someone through as gently as possible, and you still run the risk of it failing. This is why I no longer use schizopsychotic delusional as an insult. Story 50. I've lost count of how many vitally important things to the world's ecological health are on the verge of collapse, and I wish I could be blissfully unaware of how close we are to a very avoidable ecological disaster. Story 51. A dingo really did eat that woman's baby, and everyone still just makes fun of her to this day. Put your phone down and sit in silence for 30 seconds while you imagine what it would be like to 1. Be eaten alive by a dingo, and 2. Find out that happened to your baby, have nobody believe you, and become an international laughingstock. What the fudge, guys? Story 52. When they pull all of your organs out for surgery, they don't rearrange them back inside of you. They just kind of mush everything back in and your body figures it out. Story 53. The meaning of the song Pretty by Korn. It's about a true story of a baby violation by her father with her legs broken backwards like a rag doll. Absolutely vile. YouTube Korn out Pretty. Story 54. When my kids are at school and my wife is at work, I could call the cops and report a body in my shed. The cops would find me so my family wouldn't have to. I'm not going to do it, but the possibility being there makes it harder to stop the thoughts. Because for years I didn't want my family to find me. Now sometimes it feels like a big safety net is just gone. I wish I'd never realized the fact the possibility exists. Answer. The possibility also exists that one of them could come home early at any time without you knowing they will. My mom spent her whole life thinking her mom committed tragic end. Turns out she didn't. It was an accident, but my mom died not knowing that. It fudged her up for life. On her own deathbed, in the final stages of cancer at 55, when she reached the visioning stage, she saw her mom more than anyone else. And it became horrifically clear just how badly it had tortured her for nearly 50 years. Sometimes that's the only thing that keeps me going. Knowing how severely traumatized my kids would be and that they'd spend their entire lives thinking it was their fault. Story 55. Companies like Walmart will take out life insurance policies on elderly and obese employees without their knowledge for profit. Story 56. As a kid, I always thought that the grown-ups had everything under control. As an adult, I realized that every single person alive is an idiot, and it frightens me. Story 57. If you died in your sleep and have pets, say a big fat cat, they will eat your face off because they're hungry. Happened to my sister-in-law. Story 58. The realistic number of humans in slavery around the world. It is staggering. The numbers is minimum of 250,000 and probably closer to the next big number. Story 59. If you don't close your toilet lid, poopy particles can spread all over your walls, including your toothbrush. Story 60. When you dream, your brain releases tiny trace amounts of DMT. This is why dreams can sometimes feel longer than they are. It causes your perception of time to expand in a way. When you die, seconds before total brain passing, your brain releases 2,000 times that amount of DMT in a frantic attempt to calm itself down right at the end of life. The scary part, how do you know you aren't dying right now? And time just feels normal because your brain is being flooded with chemicals in an attempt to make you feel better about your passing. How do you know this is real? Story 61. That there's a theory that our universe is part of a never-ending cycle, where at some point everything will contract back together to a singular hot point in which another big bang will occur, and this entire thing starts over again. Story 62. The staggering number of young girls that are sold off for violation and indentured servitude under the name of marriage across the world. The number of preteens sold to men usually over 40, and knowing what it happens to them for the rest of their lives is a fact about our species. I wish I could unknow. Story 63. That the FDA has a list of allowable contaminants per food type. For example, when mass-producing chocolate, insect contaminants. The chocolate in six 100-gram subsamples contains an average of 60 or more insect fragments per 100 grams. Or, any one subsample contains 90 or more insect fragments, even if the overall average of all the subsamples is less than 60. Rodent contaminants. The chocolate in six 100-gram subsamples contains an average of more than 1.0 rodent hair per 100 grams, regardless of the size of the hairs or hair fragments. Or, any one subsample contains more than 3 rodent hairs, even if the overall average is less than 1.0 rodent hair. Source: FDA.gov. Story 64. Air travel is not very safe or secure at all. TSA misses 95 of contraband and 50 to 70 of weapons when hidden by the average person. A professional is virtually impossible to catch at a TSA checkpoint, which is why no-fly lists are important. In one of the TSA tests where they used a former CIA agent, he was able to smuggle 5 fake guns, 20 knives, and a bottle of fake chloroform in his carry-on. In another concerning bit of information from Mythbusters, the various shops after your security check sell everything needed to create over 24 types of bombs that could destroy a plane. An anonymous insider released a list online in hopes of forcing the airlines and airports to stop selling certain items. The Mythbusters thought it would be a quick myth to bust and started testing the list. The Mythbusters discovered the list was in fact real and right. The Mythbusters handed a list of the base ingredients to the TSA, but most airports refused to stop selling the items due to those items being very profitable and started to track purchases of those items instead. At least the Mythbusters canceled that episode, but the list that started all this still exists on the internet. Do note that trying to find it can get you put on a no-fly list. Answer: the reactive nature of aviation security is frustrating. Frankly, a knife or gun on a plane isn't nearly as much of a threat now as it was pre-911. The 911 hijack and crash attack was only ever going to work once, as evidenced by Flight 93. Prior to 911, hijackings were hostage situations. The playbook for passengers and crew was to comply and either be released or rescued. As soon as a plane full of people know they're not getting out alive, they have nothing to lose. They're dead if the terrorists get control, and even if fighting back means some or all of them die, that's better than them, plus a building full of people. A terrorist could eliminate every passenger on a plane, and the crew wouldn't open the cockpit door. And that's if a group of terrorists can even take control of the cabin, which is unlikely even with weapons. If you look at reports of failed attacks since then, the terrorists generally get the shoot beat out of them. There's no more do what they say and survive. It's, there are 200 of us and one of you, and you're not going to fudge eliminate us today, jerk. It's a bit comforting to be knowing that anyone who visibly tries anything on a plane is suddenly going to be contending with a whole bunch of people in fight or flight mode who have no option to run. Story 65. Black hole triple systems exist. V404 SIGIN. One outcome in this unstable system is that one black hole is ejected. The speed of the ejected black hole would be expected to be near light speed. Said black hole cannot be seen nor detected by points on its trajectory. Story 66. Killer whales are the only natural predator of the moose, but because of their unique interactions, the moose never really gained a fight-flight response, meaning that one species will always be prey and never know it forever. Long moose and killer whales exist. Story 67. I needed a colon resection, diverticulitis. I signed permission for student doctors to observe the procedure. As I was waking from anesthesia, I heard a student say, "Man, did you see that? He had his whole fist in there." I never asked where there was. Story 68. The low end of the statistical range suggests that at least one of males are primarily intimacy attracted to prepubescent children. That means you probably know a handful of pedos, and there are probably millions of them in the US. Story 69. That they used to use baby chicks to keep elephants standing still in a box while flying. Elephants are emotionally aware enough to deliberately not step on a chick and eliminate it, also because it would cause stress to the other chicks. Can you imagine? Cruelty on so many levels. Ugh. Story 70. All scientific points lead to passing just being the end. I wish I could believe that there were a heaven and everlasting happiness that you made it in. Story 71. Pretty much everything in the documentary Earthlings, narrated by Joaquin Phoenix, about the treatment of animals across the world. I saw it around 2006. I will never be able to cleanse my memory of the fox having its fur unsheathed from its entire body, from tail to head, while it's still very much alive. The way it throws its furless, earless head back, mouth agape in silent, unimaginable agony. Story 72. That a man who stopped talking to me in September 2022, but I still have feelings for died in April 2025. I found out on June 14th. I wish I wouldn't know it because now the love I still feel hurts so much. Story 73. Although they wouldn't openly admit it, studies show adult men tend to be attracted to girls much younger than people would think. Answer. I mean, this isn't surprising if it's just a physical thing. Most teenagers by 16 or so have the basic body they'll have as an adult. What rightfully turns people off is knowing how undeveloped that person's physical brain, and thus their identity, is. I ain't going to develop attraction to a teenager any more than to develop attraction to a stunning 40-year-old in a coma. The person is not just the body. So people don't admit that they can be attracted to teenage bodies because they're good enough humans to recognize there is more to a person than their body. And that overwhelms whatever visual stimuli isn't even conscious. What goes on with a person actively and openly acknowledging an attraction to teenagers is that they give fudge all about the human, unless it's because they can knowingly manipulate their youth. Story 74. Christopher Columbus met mermaids and went into graphic, descriptive detail about what the insides of them felt like, including his crewmen. They were manatees. Story 75. Lots of police departments around the country have several backed-up violation kits that haven't been tested. That means there are an enormous amount of unsolved violation takedown charges because the labs simply haven't gotten to testing all of them yet. We have the database. All we need is the legwork. I've listened to some heartbreaking podcasts about parents who fought endlessly to get their deceased daughter's violation kit tested for matching DNA. Imagine knowing the solution to your daughter's takedown is in a building in your city, in a drawer somewhere, and you are told you have to wait until they get to the other 200 or so violation kits that haven't been tested. Some parents don't even get the chance to get closure before they pass themselves. All of these potential solved homicides and all of the dangerous people still at large that commuted them are sitting in evidence buildings all around the county just waiting to be tested. I think about that when I'm driving past a police station. Story 76. The entire Junko Furuta case. Nothing before or after has ever done more harm to my faith in humanity. It's not the terrible things they did. While sickening, others have done worse. It's how many people knew about it, either took part in it, or just did nothing. Long story short as possible. A teenage girl was kidnapped, violation, tortured for months, then takedown. There were 4 main perps, but dozens of people connected to those involved in the crime knew the whole time and did nothing. There were claims that the main perp also invited random friends, not part of the main 4, to violation her as well. Some claim they were afraid due to one of the perps' ties to local gangs. Others clearly just didn't give a shoot. The parents of one of the perps blamed the victim's parents for ruining their son's reputation. Imagine being that kid. How many people saw her, and how many times did she think someone amongst them would save her or alert authorities, or just have some basic level of compassion enough to do literally anything, only for it to not happen? And then society at large failed because the main perps were minors. So they all got slaps on the wrist, and everyone else involved was nebulous and had some level of plausible deniability. Somewhere out there still are dozens of people who were actively aware or participated in the violation, torture, and takedown of a girl who did nothing but turn down a psychopath and his friends, and they're walking free, living their lives. The entire case makes me completely unable to trust humanity at large, because while there might be something uniquely Japanese about not making waves to that level, it shows that humans can become that. Dozens of cowards at best, monsters at worst, all just waiting for the right circumstances. Whenever I have the misfortune of remembering the story, I find myself teetering on the edge of fantasies about supervillainy, like I just want to throw all of mankind into the sun. Call it a day. The human experiment has failed and is beyond salvaging. Story 77. The majority of Americans never read a book after high school. This includes college graduates. Something like 75 don't read anything that is not work-related. Of the 25 that do read, around 90 of those only read the newspaper news online. There is functionally no difference between someone who can't read and someone who won't read. Story 78. The takedown committed by the toolbox killers and the fact that there exists an audio of them torturing a woman Ledford. That audio was the most darn piece of evidence and caused people in both the jury and audience to weep. Reading about how they kidnap, violation, and take down these young women make me wish there's a special rung in hell reserved for people like the two monsters to spend an eternity in. Story 79. The scent of fresh-cut grass is basically caused by each blade crying in pain. Learned that from a biologist. Story 80. If your brain detects your eyes, you can go blind. Oh, and also that male dolphins violation female dolphins in a gang for weeks. Story 81. The Superb Owl is the biggest weekend in the world for human trafficking anywhere in the globe. A large percent of successful business people are sociopaths with no sense of morals when it comes to environment, the future, or children. They are so successful because of the any means necessary motivation. The reason the U.S. wanted Afghanistan is to produce opium to destabilize all the people in that region, the same way the Mexican cartels funnel substances into the USA to help destabilize the USA. The substances war is not a war on substances, but a war using substances to destabilize entire populations around the globe. CIA operatives tortured Abu Zubaydah in Guantanamo over 80 times through waterboarding. No additional information was given up the 5th time or the 80th time. CIA officer Oliver North helped substances kingpins move crack into California to help Ronald Reagan fund his Iran-Contra affair. Ronald Reagan's wife launched a Just Say No campaign while Republicans worked tirelessly to invest in private prisons to lock up the same people who brought the substances from the government. Story 82. What I learned today on my way home from work. I'm still shaking. I'm afraid of my future now and how things will unravel after this knowledge. For the first time in my life, I finally had the perfect job, perfect boss. I've gone through hell to get to this point. I figured I had to go through all the hardships to get to this point. Today, that idea was destroyed. My boss's wife says she needs to speak to me. I call her as soon as I get off. It turns out she thinks her husband is having an affair. My jaw dropped. I was not expecting this at all. I truly believed he was a faithful, loyal family man. I've grown to be close to him and his wife over the last 5 years. I'm close to her mother also. I never would have guessed he was like this. Not in a million years. Apparently, he's been cheating on her for 15 years. He has a cheating problem. He likes the chase and conquest. They have 4 children together, junior high to college ages. She cried to me. She was hoping I would have some sort of confession, but I didn't. I would never, ever consider any man in a relationship. The thought disgusts me. She told me then it must be that he's infatuated with me and it must be all him, one-sided. I told her there was nothing romantic about our conversations ever. Yes, we joke around, but this is with the entire office, and there's nothing intimacy or romantic about it. All this time, I thought I was safe from this type of situation, and here I am again, back in this horrendous predicament. She told me the last employees he cheated with, he fired her because obviously he's never leaving his wife and family. I had to listen to all the details of this person I clearly knew nothing about, a stranger to me. Not the person I thought he was. I had to calm her and reassure her that there was nothing going on between us. I was trembling at the thought that she would believe such a terrible thing about me. My heart is broken for her, for their children, and even for myself now. I have no doubt she will tell him she confronted me because apparently she always confronted the other women and him in the past. She told him she knows he's cheating. Today is just the first time learning about this, and she decided to involve me. I'm terrified of losing my job now. I don't know how to act the same as before towards him now. I don't want to give him any impressions. She proceeded to tell me that she believes it must be me that he has a crush on and wants to conquer. Even if I don't feel the same way, this is a fudge nightmare. I'm a single mom with 2 kids and 2 dogs. I need my job. I need this job specifically for so many reasons. Another job just won't do. I'm shattered at the thoughts of what will happen next. This bullshit always happens to me. I wear scrubs all darn day. I wear a fudge mask for 7-8 hours. My hair is always in a clip. There is nothing sexy going on here. I can never trust anything or anyone, and it's so fudge isolating that I have to live like this. Married men thinking they can attempt anything with me because they are my boss. I'm so tired of this bullshit. Feels like I'm losing everything again. I can keep going through this. I can't tell anyone about it, and there's no way I'm sleeping tonight. Story 83. Germany sponsored putting abandoned kids with pedophiles. Experiment started in the 60s. Last kids left the program in 2000s. The whole shoot show was government-sponsored research, so it had to go through the ethics and funding committees, and nobody put a stop to it for decades. Story 84. I read that doctors dissolved a human brain with acid which left only the microplastics behind, and the weight of the microplastics was the equivalent of one plastic spoon. Story 85. You know when you're eating pistachios and every once in a while you get one that tastes a little off? Yeah, that's larvae. I love pistachios, but it's been hard to eat them since learning this fact. Story 86. That two twin boys died from being circumcised in New York after a rabbi sucked on the children's male body part and gave them an STD that ultimately led to their deaths. It was totally legal, but since then it's now just a fine. In addition to this, circumcision is undoubtedly genital mutilation that traumatizes children and hurts men's intimacy sensitivity. I am glad I learned about this, but sometimes ignorance is bliss. Story 87. I have a good few, because learning medical disorders is a hobby of mine. Cephalic disorders, particularly autocephaly and cyclopia, agrypnia excitata, total insomnia, complete inability to sleep, which can result in passing. Fatal insomnia, prion disorder, goes in 4 stages, usually inherited but can also be sporadic. Morvan syndrome, characterized by itchiness, decreased need for sleep, and significantly decreased REM and shortwave sleep, sometimes to the point of agrypnia excitata. REM sleep behavior disorder, which is movements during sleep and other symptoms, and delirium tremens, a terrifying disorder caused by sudden severe withdrawal of adult beverage. Story 88. I'm glad rabies practically doesn't exist where I live, because it's terrifying knowing you're guaranteed fudge the second you start showing symptoms. Story 89. I won't say it happens a lot because I do not have any specific statistics, but you know those tragic yet heartwarming stories about starving kittens and dogs that are found on the street and rescued? Shows their recovery journey until they are happy and healthy? There is no guarantee the shots are in real order. Grab a healthy kitten, slowly starve it to passing, re-edit the footage, and post for karma. Story 90. That capitalism isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed. And to that end, there must be losers for it to function. The economy was never built for the bottom 95. We're just labor, consumer, and data inputs to feed the system that serves the top. And if they have their way with AI scaling, they are attempting to make it so they don't even need us as inputs anymore. They won't need us to consume or labor for them. So we will just be in the way in the future. Good luck to us. Story 91. I wish I could unsee what humans do to each other and animals. From ISIS beheading videos in 2015 to watching Dominion animal cruelty documentary, watch it here for free, drone strikes on innocent Palestinians covered in blood, seeking for help in hospitals, Aaron Bushnell burning himself to passing in protest of genocide, people jumping out of the WTC to their deaths, and so much more. Humans are a disease. Story 92. Chainsaws were originally invented to aid in childbirth. They were basically used to remove the pelvic bone. Story 93. You've been deeper inside your mom than your father has ever been, and you also made her scream a lot louder than he ever could. Story 94. There's a type of tumor known as teratoma that can grow hair and teeth. I would not look it up unless you have a strong stomach. Don't say I didn't warn you. Story 95. All your organs have the same touch receptors as your skin, but your brain doesn't register the impulses as it'd be too overwhelming. So if your brain didn't block that, you could feel all your organs touching. Story 96. From Annie Jacobson's book, Nuclear War, a Scenario, I gleaned the following. Hope the stats are right, but if not exact, they are close to what was written. If nuclear war breaks out between the US and Russia, based on war games from the 80s, within the first hour, 50 million people die. The northern hemisphere is uninhabitable for years to centuries, depending on sites hit, uranium storage at a nuclear power plant versus no nuclear material, and likely 90% of the Earth's population will die within the first year. I did not sleep well after reading this book. Story 97. You can break your own thumb quite easily by folding your wrist down and squeezing your thumb with your middle and index finger. Typing this shoot makes me cringe at the thought. Story 98. The amount of food partied too hard just because is more practical for the producers, and sellers toss it to trash than lowering the price or give it away. Story 99. It takes a woman on average 7 times to leave an abusive relationship, and that if a firearm is in the house, it makes you 400 more likely to domestic homicide. Story 100. I'm not going to say it for what will soon be obvious reasons, but while taking my psychology degree, we learned of a theory that has been proven to be detrimental to your mental health, just to know what it is. Like, you don't even need to believe it, Just the simple fact of knowing about it makes you a little depressed and a whole host of stuff like that just by knowing about it. I legit asked, why the fudge do you teach it to us then? Answer was, because it might be true. Great stuff. Did not make me feel any better, but that is actually why it makes people feel depressed. It might be true. Story 101. During slavery in the United States, slavery wasn't just for picking cotton or free labor. There were handbooks specifically how to break down your slaves and how to treat them in ways that will dehumanize them the most. Literal handbooks written on how to treat your slaves in the worst ways possible, how to destroy their culture, their language, their minds, their bodies, etc. It was so much more than just, oh, free labor, and IDK, how much I need to reiterate that. Story 102. There were probably several astronauts who survived the explosion of the Challenger and died when it landed. Story 103. Learning the things that children experience when they are left in hot cars will ruin your fudge life. Story 104. The voice actress for Ducky from Land Before Time and Anne Marie from All Dogs Go to Heaven was taken down by her father. Story 105. Kuru is a disease that humans can get that causes tremors, ataxia, involuntary movements, muscle stiffness and random jerking, difficulty swallowing, dementia, mutism, loss of ability to stand and walk, then eventually coma and passing. You can only contract the disease by eating infected human brain tissue. This means at some point cannibalism in humans was so widespread that evolution decided it was a useful way to spread a disease. Story 106. Once on my uncle's farm out west, I saw a lightning strike straight down into a field, and it eliminated a couple of dozen cows instantly. Not one could be saved. Story 107. Shoebill storks? You know the bird that's super honorable? With an intense stare, makes dinosaur noises and bows when you bow to it? They shoot on their own legs to keep cool. I never needed to know that. Story 108. That you can love a person for decades and then find out they aren't that person at all. It was like a shell they're fronted with. Story 109. That organ donation companies are actually more after your skin and long bone than your organs. There is money in skin. They can do numerous things with it. The way a body looks after skin and long bone donations is something families would be devastated if they saw. PVC pipes stuffed in the legs with old rags, loosely sewn together, feet just flopping around like a jellyfish. They aren't interested in your organs unless you're a child or teen. And sadly, most people say he donated his organs so others could live. High chances are he was skinned and deboned, but no organs were taken. Story 110. We wouldn't have the medical progress we currently do without atrocities committed by the war criminals of WM1. Story 111. Retinal detachment is a thing, usually caused by a strong blow to the face or some other condition like severe myopia. However, if you have eye floaters, it's possible for it to happen spontaneously. The scary part for me is that it is completely painless. The only signs of it are a curtain-like shadow encompassing your vision, spontaneous phosphites or floaters, or random flashes of light. The only way to treat it is with eye surgery. The idea of eye surgery, however, is quite frankly terrifying to me because they can't sedate you because your eyes need to be open. So all they can do is localized anesthesia. Being a hypochondriac, I'm constantly noticing things in my peripheral vision and fearing its retinal detachment. The worst part is if it is not treated in 24-48 hours or your retina completely detached, permanent vision loss can and will occur. Story 112. I've heard if you work with cockroaches enough because of the amount of crap that exists from them pooping all the time, eventually you develop an allergy to them. Think it's an allergy, at least a disgust to them. Around the same time, you also start to develop an allergy to chocolate. Makes you think how much of the poop is in chocolate. Story 113. I am 100 on my own even though I am married, have a living mother, 2 living siblings. I have 0 people in my life to share secrets or vent to or share victories. I am not alone, but I am so very lonely. Story 114. Alzheimer only shows symptoms after around 10 years. Until that point, your brain can fight the disease. When you learn that you have ALS, that means your brain is already in a really bad condition. Story 115. I recently learned that the air in a train station is something like 30 human skin. I do not know how this is possible. For the record, I haven't been on a train in 4 years. Story 116. Uncanny Valley, the fact that there used to be an evolutionary reason to be afraid of something that looked human but wasn't. Story 117. That people can be so full of dislike and be so cruel to one another. There needs to be more love in this world. There's not enough of it. Story 118. This one serial killer that eliminated and ate children and then wrote letters to the parents about how they tasted. Over 10 years after reading that article, and I still remember the blood feeling after reading it. Story 119. Dolphins are assholes. Those fuckers will violation anything they feel will entertain them. Other dolphins, seals, whatevs, they attack other species for funsies like porpoises. Those poor things who don't even know why they're getting bodied out of nowhere. They also eliminate baby dolphins, not just their own, but rando ones too if they feel like it, which since they're sickos isn't such a bad thing. Maybe we need less of them, but still, they're just babies offs, and unlike dogs, dolphins actually have a dominance hierarchy, so whoever is the biggest jerk wins. Fun fact, I used to be a swim teacher in FL, so I would teach kids to swim in the ocean. If my students were good enough, we would go past the buoys, is where the shelf cuts off and you can learn to free dive, which also meant there would be ocean life there like dolphins. This was before I knew dolphins were assholes, so it was cool seeing them show up on occasion until they realized they could satiate their boredom and steal my swim toys I used for teaching. They stole hundreds of dollars worth of my equipment before I looked up why they were acting like that. After that, I spent my money renting out time in pools that went past 50 because fudge dolphins. Story 120. That Pedro Lopez, a Colombian rapist and serial murderer of at least 110 young girls, served only 14 years for his crimes and was let free. He has since disappeared, but is suspected in multiple takedowns since. Story 121. When you walk into a public restroom and someone is dropping heat and you smell it instantly, it's because poop particles are in your nose already. Cheers. Story 122. A couple things I learned when my son died. There is a very distinct sensation right before someone passes away that almost feels like a sixth sense. The closest comparison I can think of is like one of those old light bulbs that still glows a bit after you turn it off, where when the glow stops completely, that's passing. It's through that sense that tells us something is alive, instinctively, and it dwindles until the person feels like an inanimate object. With my son, it started about 5 minutes before his heart stopped. The paleness of passing is incomparable. The blood drains from the face and extremities so fast it's like someone pulled the drain plug. But that blood doesn't disappear. It pools like the worst bruise you've ever seen, usually in the rear end and back. When you die, your bowels relax and anything that was left inside comes out. Right before someone passes, even if they've been unconscious for multiple days, they might flail. The passing rattle is a common occurrence in hospice where there is this horrible sounding gurgle with every breath. Also, apnea spells get more common in the last few hours. Story 123. A 21-on-1 study found that since 9/11, 7,157 soldiers have died in combat and 30,177 veterans have died by tragic end. Story 124. Occasionally, CPR will result in a person becoming conscious again while compressions are ongoing. However, their body is still not functioning correctly, so the CPR must continue. CPR does not feel pleasant. It cracks ribs and bends the sternum inward. So you end up with a patient that is in extreme pain, but you can't stop because you're the only thing keeping them alive, at least until a qualified medic can push anesthesia and have them put under. In such rare cases, the patient frequently begs the care provider to just let them die because the pain is so extreme. Story 125. The laws of physics are not set in stone and can change at any time, for any reason, into anything. Studies suggest this has happened a few times already. Story 126. Last week I found out that house centipedes can jump up to 7 feet and also love to fall from the ceiling. Sweet dreams. Story 127. In many states, women under anesthesia are given pelvic exams without providing clear or any consent. Story 128. This one is stupid, but apparently disturbs me a ton. Skyscrapers shift a couple inches with the wind. This fact has caused me to have recurring nightmares where I am flown into a wall of a skyscraper due to wind. I'm not even scared of heights, but my subconscious is terrified of skyscrapers moving a couple inches with wind. Story 129. Learn from a friend that raises goats. If you keep the males away from females together long enough, they will start to go to pound town on each other. Story 130. I'll never forget learning about Sputnik 2 in middle school while studying the solar system. Obviously, everyone was like, "Oh, so sad," but no. That story bothered me for weeks. Arip Laika. Story 131. Your body starts to shut down at exactly 104.5 degrees Fahrenheit of internal temperature. Also, it will take roughly 1,046 and upward winds to rip your skin clean off of your flesh. I don't remember the exact numbers, but that's roughly what I ended up calculating after around 10 minutes of studying the average tensile strength of skin, so it's probably not the most accurate. Story 132. How dogs and cats are processed for meat in Asia. Don't look it up. It's not worth the mental scars. Story 133. That sometimes during the winter the owner would think their pet ferret was dead, when in actuality it was just in a very deep sleep. So it's kind of common for ferrets to be buried alive in a box or something because the owner didn't know it wasn't dead. Story 134. There's a disease you could get from eating an infected brain. It's called kuru, and it causes tremors, fits of laughter, and eventually passing. It wasn't from cows. That's mad cow disease. Kuru came from human brains, passed on through ritual cannibalism in Papua New Guinea. The cause? Prions. Twisted proteins that don't die, don't decay, and eat your brain from the inside out. They can survive in soil for decades. Story 135. Penguins are horrifying creatures. Male penguins violation just about anything. Females, males, young, even penguin corpses. They also go on to gang violation, whether the receiver is alive or not. Story 136. When water goes down the wrong tube, people with dementia don't die from dementia. They die of pneumonia because water goes down the wrong tube. Now, every time water goes down the wrong tube, I'm reminded that I'm probably going to die someday due to complications of dementia. Story 137. That the firebombing of Tokyo was with napalm and all the horrible ways that people died and suffered that night of March 9/10, 1945. Story 138. That the current U.S. regime was in the works since Reagan. I mean, it was technically always trying to get here since the Confederates lost the war, but things really took a nosedive after we elected a racist movie star with Alzheimer's. Story 139. Whenever history books, media, society want to downplay an event, they use black and white or low-definition photos to artificially inflate the feeling of time passing since the event. Color photography was invented in 1880s. It started becoming mainstream in the 60s. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. I've never seen a color photograph of him used in a book or on TV. Story 140. Disturbing fact. Many people acting disgusted and outraged in this thread will die on the hill saying circumcision isn't child mutilation and abuse. Story 141. If you look at a map of the U.S. of where people go missing and overlap it with a map of the cave system, they coincide almost exactly. So that explains one thing and sort of explains why it'll happen again. Imagining how many people must have died screaming in starving darkness gives me chills. Story 142. Male sea otters have a tendency to violation not only their female counterparts, but also it's not exactly uncommon for them to do the same to a pup that hasn't reached maturity. They also do it to baby harbor seals. Story 143. That it can take up to a year to show symptoms of rabies. I had a potential scare, but didn't get the shots because I was certain I wasn't bitten. Bat flew into my head during daylight. Then someone told me this fact like 6 months after I neglected to get them, so I lived for the rest of the year waiting for the other shoe to drop. Story 144. Rokos basilisk. Genuinely, don't look it up unless you want to potentially be punished by something that doesn't exist yet. Story 145. At the WTC on 91101, there was Muzak playing in the plaza between the towers as they burned. There are videos on YouTube of How Deep Is Your Love and Always a Woman to Me playing as bodies are falling and smacking the ground. The Muzak didn't stop until the first tower fell, and the first firefighter who died on 911 at the WTC was struck by a falling body. They both died from the impact. Story 146. My mom and her 5 siblings that made it to adulthood, 2 sets of twins that were miscarried, may have been the result of marital violation, which is just violation. But during my grandmother's lifetime, it wasn't considered that. It was a wifely duty bar face. Maybe my mom or her siblings weren't, but there is a better chance they were. Neither of my grandparents were alive past my teen years, so I'll never be able to ask. Story 147. There was a civil war in some South American country where the army beat babies off trees. It's very well known, and it horrifies me when I remember it.